Welcome to Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. We've got a theme on the show today, and that is that America is getting fed up with GOP terrorism. Thank God, the call going out seems to be that enough is enough. I'm going to tell you what you can do about it. And some of these solutions may sound familiar if you're a regular watcher of the show. There is a reason for that. America is designed to resist variance, a sudden spike in any given thing. Designed to resist variance in the stock market. It's designed to resist variance in political opinion. In other words, one big event rarely results in change in the USA. What does result in change most often is constant, sustainable pressure. All the energy you would have put into organizing a rally and going out and chanting for an evening, calling the local news and saying, come on out. Check out this thing we're doing. That energy spread out over 6 months of emails instead is more likely to have an effect if you're sending them to the right people and you're saying the right things. You right now most likely have more power than you think you do. Obviously, I can't know how much power you think you have, but here's the reality. 5 or 6 people in a district who regularly contact their representative will have an effect on what their representative does and says, the legislation they try to push, the legislation they don't try to push. If you are a progressive and your district representative is a far right-winger, even you and your opinions can affect them. Why? Because, and this goes to a clip we played in a previous show, because representatives tend to win their districts by what we would think of as a handful of votes. A couple hundred people. In small districts, can be a couple dozen people. The other day, we did on the show a clip of George Santos's roommate, and he described Santos as one of the highest elected officials in the country. And I suppose that's true in the sense that, you know, if you're comparing him to mayors and folks at the local level, okay, sure. But it gives a faulty impression of how much it takes to sway these people. In another show, we pulled a clip from the Majority Report that was talking about this specifically. So few people take advantage of the fact that they can contact their representative, that it only takes a handful to deeply affect how they conduct their business. Of the cultures in America that do contact their representatives regularly, you want to guess which one takes advantage of that? The far right takes advantage of that. Right-wingers in general, actually, they do not hesitate to use the emails, use the phone calls, etc., etc. So much so that the default return message in my area is to say, we understand that you disagree. Here's a link to facts about yada 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 yada. Even if I'm contacting them to say, hey, good job, they're just used to getting inundated with right-wing messages. A great way for us to move the Overton window in the direction it needs to go for us to maintain a democracy will be to make a habit contacting our representatives, contacting the Department of Justice, letting them know that we exist and we're watching them and we expect them to do their jobs. I'd like you to remember that as we look at some of the events, recent developments in the American landscape. First up, my man Glenn Kirshner. He's been doing the YouTube scene for a while. I'm somewhat new to his work, and I love it. I don't know how I missed him before. Here he is talking about a federal judge finding in their ruling that Trump bears responsibility for January 6th. If only he was the one on trial.
Well, friends, another federal judge just stated the obvious, that the insurrection was a Donald Trump production. Let's talk about that, because justice matters.
I do love his intro. I'm going to mute it, though, so I don't get hit with a copyright strike, just in case.
Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends,
Hi,
I spent a good part of today in federal district court in Washington, D.C., watching two trials. The Proud Boys seditious conspiracy trial. Members of that organization are on trial for trying to violently overthrow the government, trying to violently stop the certification of Joe Biden's election win. And I watched some of a second trial, which is part two of the Oath Keepers case. Remember that a group of Oath Keepers have already been convicted of a seditious conspiracy and other charges for their attack on the Capitol on January 6th. This is part two. This is a second group of Oath Keepers who are presently on trial. And
first of all, I really want to stress, this is a terrorist group. Like, we don't think of them, especially those of us who were around in the early 2000s. We don't think of them as terrorists in the, I suppose, classic sense. The way Americans tend to think of terrorists, or at least once upon a time did. But when he says Oath Keepers, it's no different than Taliban, ISIS. That's what we're talking about here.
I couldn't help but think to myself during the course of the day that I wouldn't be there, sitting in federal court watching these trials, had Donald Trump not told all of his supporters, his base, his lackeys, come to D.C. on January 6th will be wild. And had Donald Trump not then told them at the Stop the Steal pre-insurrection pep rally, you have to fight like hell or you won't have a country anymore. Now go to the Capitol and stop the steal. Stop the certification.
And the January 6th committee concurs, by the way.
And they did.
4 charges they recommended.
And what continues to
still no action from Garland,
confound me, disturb me, is that we have 2 co-equal branches of government who have been virtually yelling and screaming that Donald Trump is responsible for the insurrection. You have the judiciary, judge after judge, has been saying in their findings and in their opinions, this was a Donald Trump orchestration, in so many words. You have the legislative branch, the January 6th House Select Committee, yelling and screaming that Donald Trump is the one responsible for launching the attack on the Capitol. This was Donald Trump's insurrection. And yet you have the third branch of government, the executive branch, the Department of Justice, the only branch of the 3 branches of government that has the power to charge Donald Trump for the crimes that we all know he committed. And yet they don't. The executive
Run by Merrick Garland. This man is going to go down in history as one of the weakest attorneys general we have ever had. I can just see moderate Democrats right now getting ready to build him a statue for the moment where he comes out and gives a press conference and says, Donald Trump bears responsibility for January 6th. And this is me saying it officially. We're not going to charge him because we feel like we can't build a case and blah, 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 blah. But I'm putting it on the record. They're gonna try to eat that up. The American people have had it. And I'm delighted to see that. But we got to organize. Let's let Glenn continue.
executive branch, the Department of Justice, the FBI lags behind the other two co-equal branches of government who have been screaming from the rooftops the need to hold Donald Trump accountable for his crimes.
Have the American people.
And now it happened again today. Because today, another federal judge in Washington, D.C., this time Judge Colleen Kolar-Catelli, issued a written opinion in a case talking about why a particular defendant attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Let me set it up a little bit. Judge Kolar-Catelli, who I actually know fairly well professionally, I tried an arson case in front of her many years ago. I also handled a capital case, a death penalty case, in front of her involving the murder of an FBI task force member who was a Maryland state trooper. So I've had cases before Judge Kolar-Catelli. She's a fantastic judge, great jurist, fair, even-handed. And she actually tried a case sitting as the finder of fact. What do I mean by that? Well, there was a case involving a series of misdemeanor crimes for somebody who unlawfully entered the Capitol but didn't assault police officers. And in that misdemeanor case, the judge sat as the finder of fact. There was no jury. So sometimes you try a case to a judge. We call it a bench trial. And in felony cases, you try those cases to a jury.
It's a side note, totally. I don't understand this legal process as well. I have heard of it before. I believe the defendant has to waive their right to a jury trial. And I'm not sure why you would do that, but I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation. That said, that's explaining her involvement in this case.
So Judge Kolar-Catelli, was the finder of fact. She tried this case and made the decision on guilty or not guilty herself. And she issued a written opinion setting out her findings in the case after a 3-day trial.
I love the way this guy reads formal things. It is like a bedtime story to me.
I was first alerted to this today when I saw a tweet from my friend Kyle Cheney at Politico. And here's what he tweeted. Just in, federal judge delivers a January 6th guilty verdict for defendant Deneen McAndrew, but makes clear she, the judge, views McAndrew as having followed President Trump's instructions. Well, needless to say, when I saw that tweet from Kyle, I went and printed out Judge Kolar-Catelli's opinion in the case to see what she had said about this defendant following Trump's orders when she attacked the Capitol. And I want to read the opening salvo of the judge's opinion, the first 2 paragraphs, because I think it nicely frames what this defendant, Deneen McAndrew, did. And then I'm going to jump to the end of the opinion. It's an 18-page opinion, and read 2 short passages about what the evidence showed Trump's responsibility was. But first, here is the factual backdrop. Clad in a MAGA hat, wearing a red scarf, and wielding a Trump flag, the defendant, Deneen McAndrew, knew she was not permitted to be in or around the Capitol on January 6th, 20.
I'm sorry, I gotta jump in. The fact that we had a crowd of Trump supporters waving literally flags with the guy's name on it, replacing the American flag with those flags. The fact that we had people going directly from a speech he gave to overrun the Capitol. I don't know that you need any more evidence than that to literally have an indictment. It's insane to me how blatant crime can be as long and not be punished, as long as it's a conservative doing it. It's insane to me. Oh, excuse me, a rich conservative. Ridiculous.
2021. That knowledge, like a snowball rolling down a ski slope, accumulated that day. Her suspicions undoubtedly started when, contrary to her testimony, in other words, the defendant testified and lied, in the opinion of the judge, contrary to her testimony, she passed area-closed signs affixed to strewn fencing. If she did not know at that time her presence at the Capitol grounds was unlawful, her awareness must have been stronger when she clambered over dismantled bike racks and snow fencing even closer to the Capitol building with their own area-closed signs. If, after seeing those signs, she did not know her presence was unlawful after those signs, then surely she knew she was unlawfully present when she encountered a line of armored Metropolitan Police Department officers marching past Capitol Police officers guarding the Capitol building behind bike racks affixed again with area-closed signs. Assuming, for the sake of argument, that she still did not know she was not permitted on Capitol grounds or in the Capitol building, she must have known when she arrived to the Upper West Terrace and met 4 individuals she testified she knew to have been pepper sprayed.
I do want to just point out the legal system has to give the benefit of the doubt to defendants. But that is taken too far culturally, I think. This group keeps saying, the J6 defendants keep saying, oh, we didn't know it was illegal. How could we have known it was illegal? What is laid out here is what every one of them encountered. Barricades, police saying you can't come in. There was scuffles with police, led by the Proud Boys. They knew. Of course they knew. They are not the ones I am most interested in. We do have to try these people, give them appropriate punishments, but this is all secondary to holding the organizers responsible. And it is to Merrick Garland's great dismay that the organizers are people he does not want to prosecute, as he has demonstrated by not doing his job, going into 3 years now.
Or to enter the realm of the fabulist. Perhaps it was only when she entered the Capitol through a broken door, an emergency siren blaring. These signs, and others detailed below, undoubtedly endowed McAndrew with the knowledge that her presence and protest in the Capitol was unlawful. Nevertheless, she remained. And then, after the judge said the defendant's presence was part of the flood waters that drowned the Capitol in insurrection and destruction. Judge Kolar Catelli went on to say the following. At the Stop the Steal rally, then President Trump eponymously exhorted his supporters to, in fact, stop the steal by marching to the Capitol. Defendant marched to the Capitol, having followed then President Trump's instructions, which were in line with her stated desires. The court therefore finds that defendant intended her presence to be disruptive to congressional business.
So recall, there we go. Recall this. You can be held, as she is right now, legally liable for following the order of a public official when that order is obviously illegal. Just exaggerate it to understand it. If the mayor of your town walks up to you and says, "Hey, go kill that guy," your reaction as a decent human being is going to be, "Okay, we got to get rid of this mayor." It's not going to be, "Oh, I guess I better go kill that guy," because that would be insane. Similarly, the judge here is finding, and I'm going to do some justice to Glenn Kirshner, the judge here is finding that this woman broke the law. Of course she did. But she's also saying she broke the law at the behest of Donald Trump. The fact that that she's going to prison now for this, but Donald Trump is not, is a failure of our country. It's a worldwide embarrassment. America has dropped so much in the eyes of the world because we are unable to hold together a democracy that has a fair justice system, which is frankly no democracy at all. It's the illusion of one. And the one good thing about Trump's time in the Oval Office is that it has made obvious the flaws in our system. I talk about all the time. I talk about Nixon, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and then Trump. All of them committed crimes while in office worthy of prison time, and none of them have faced consequences. The only difference about Trump is that it is so obvious that we cannot maintain the illusion of living in a free society anymore without holding him accountable. Downside to that is that the craziest among us have also seen that the disparity in conservatives versus liberals getting punished by the law. And they have taken that as a blank check to do whatever the hell they want. We're going to get to that in a moment. I would like to talk about George Santos for a minute. George Santos is the gift that keeps on giving, as they say. He is just like Trump in that it's actually a benefit to America to see the clown version of the Republican playbook. Yet again, a new fact about him has come to light that displays his hypocrisy as well as Republican hypocrisy. Apparently, and this is very new reporting, it should be taken with a grain of salt for that reason. But apparently, this guy who has engaged in all kinds of anti-gay rhetoric, anti-trans rhetoric, and anti-drag queen rhetoric, used to perform in a drag show under the name Kitara. That's according to a former fellow performer from Brazil. Here's the article in the New Republic. George Santos has positioned himself as a proud, unabashed conservative on social issues and all. He has expressed support for Florida's regressive Don't Say Gay law, that law that bars teachers from discussing sexual orientation or gender identity in school. Accusing Democrats of wanting to groom our kids, Santos peddled right-wing talking points that equate discussing sexual orientation or gender identity with children as tantamount to sexual abuse. Such talking points often go further, holding that drag shows, or even LGBTQ people generally, groom and abuse children. It now appears Santos has participated in drag himself. A 2008 photo from Brazil depicts Santos, known at the time as Anthony, in a drag costume under the moniker Kitara Ravache. Yeah, that's not a surprise, right? Republican hypocrisy, sure. I do love that this guy has apparently checked every single box on the hypocrisy playbook. Let me just pull up the reporter's tweet here. This is Marissa Cabas. Marissa Cabas? To work on saying that name. So she says, I just spoke on the phone with Eula Rochard, a Brazilian drag queen who was friends with George Santos when he lived near Rio. She said everyone knew him as Anthony, never George, or by his drag name Kitara, and confirms this photo is from a 2008 drag show. Look, I don't know if that really is George Santos. Maybe it isn't. I don't think we need more evidence at this point that George Santos lies. And I certainly don't think we need more evidence at this point that Republicans in general lie. But this certainly does act as a lovely cherry on top for the book of George Santos's fraud. He is exactly what I would imagine a standard Republican to be, except he's not very good at covering his tracks. That's the only difference. Well, speaking of culture war nonsense, Alex Wagner recently pointed out a flaw in the GOP strategy of attacking everybody for any reason, so long as it distracts from their own corruption. And that is that people don't want to be around that. Institutions don't want to be around that. Businesses have trouble making money in that environment. Here's Alex Wagner on MSNBC. She's interviewing Jelani Cobb about this very issue.
We reject this woke ideology. We will never surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
A few minutes ago, we were talking about states that are newly controlled by Democrats and how their agendas differ starkly from the agendas in states controlled by Republicans. And I think it's safe to say that wherever the GOP states are going next, Florida will get there first. Fresh off his big second-term win, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is turbocharging his war on woke, in which woke seems to mean anything Ron DeSantis doesn't like. DeSantis goes after all kinds of things for being woke: college basketball, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Disney, even math textbooks. And now he is slamming professional hockey. The NHL recently announced a push for more diversity in its ranks. Its workforce is over 80% white, and its players are over 90% white.
Fun fact, there's a reason for that. As we discover with most of America's problems, it's racism worn over the worse issue, which is economic disparities. The racism is there to cover for the economic disparities. If you are a white kid, it's not guaranteed that you're wealthy, but you're more likely to be from a wealthy family than if you are a black kid. You're from a wealthy family, you probably live in a wealthy town. If you're in a wealthy town, they can afford things like a hockey rink. Yes, there's the old trusty frozen over lake out back, but then again, that tends to be in rural areas. So you wind up with less opportunity for people of color to play hockey. That simple. Conversely, most schools have a football field. Most gymnasiums have a basketball hoop. So you see people of color in these sports more often. You don't see them in sports that require specialized places to play them.
But when they announced a jobs fair in Florida, DeSantis' office called it discrimination for the NHL to specifically invite applicants from underrepresented backgrounds. The NHL folded and removed the job fair posting. So congratulations if you had keeping hockey white on your bingo card of Ron DeSantis' second-term priorities. But it is Florida's schools and universities that its governor is really trying to refashion an anti-woke image. DeSantis has just packed the board of Florida's most progressive public college with hand-picked allies. He's aiming to turn New College into a conservative Christian school.
I got to tell you, in the best case scenario, where not only is Donald Trump arrested, but everybody that helped him is arrested, and that turns out to somehow include DeSantis, even though I think that guy is shady enough and used enough to living a shady life that he probably kept his hands clean on that one. But in the best case scenario where that happens, this is still going to outlive it. These appointments are going to last years and years and years, and Florida's educational system will be degraded by the decisions these people will make. All of them will be terrible.
These new board members include Chris Rufo, who's orchestrated the right-wing attack on critical race theory. And Rufo is straightforward about his goals. Quote, "We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions."
Okay, so he's just going to say the quiet part out loud. That seems to be the norm now, just saying the quiet part out loud. We got to handle it quick, because that's what happens right before they organize and their beer hall pushed turns into the other thing.
We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under that brand category. Meanwhile, professors at other Florida universities are canceling their courses dealing with race for fear of being fired. Today, the presidents of Florida's system of community and state colleges put out a joint statement declaring they stand with Governor DeSantis and won't let evil critical race theory invade their campuses.
Jesus Christ. I gotta jump in. Man, even saying something like evil critical race theory ought to get you kicked out of whatever institution you're in, unless it is a mental institution that is there to help you get better. Good God. How dare we critically examine race? By the way, the colleges are where these classes are actually supposed to be held. For once, they're in the right field. For once, they're in the right place where you might find critical race theory. Now we're dealing with the fact that actually getting rid of it is a bad thing. We want people to examine how race affects the lives of the average American. We got a segment coming up on that, but it can't just be internet, folks. Deeply depressing.
Also today, the State Board of Education finalized a rule that could see school librarians prosecuted for having undesirable books in their libraries. Undesirable to DeSantis and his allies. And in a final flourish, today we learned that DeSantis has rejected a high school advanced placement course in African American studies. The course is already being piloted in 60 schools across the country, but apparently in the state of Florida, that curriculum is against the law. The conservative National Review reported excitedly today on the letter the DeSantis administration sent to the College Board, which sets AP course curricula. That letter says, quote, "The content of this course is inexplicably contrary to Florida law and significantly lacks educational value." And it invites the College Board to, quote, "come back to the table with lawful, historically accurate content."
This is not only racist. This is the kind of racism we were dealing with in like the early 70s. You know, where it was still okay to just full on advocate for a white nationalist country. It's wild to me that these people feel comfortable saying this stuff. How far we have fallen and how quickly. And I think the reason for that is we were not as advanced as we thought we were. The we here being anybody voting Democrat. Most people that considered themselves moderates had this impression like, oh, racism is a thing that has shrunk greatly and will continue to shrink. And the reality was the system we have set up simply lets it fester because there are no consequences. It's insane.
All of this is bad enough for the people of Florida, but it may concern all of us outside of Florida if DeSantis really is on his way to a presidential run. Joining us now is Jelani Cobb, Dean of the Columbia Journalism School and a staff writer at The New Yorker. Dean Cobb, Jelani, thanks so much for being with us. And I think there's really no better person to put in perspective how damaging this agenda is in terms of education and higher education. Can you give us your thoughts on the moves that the DeSantis administration is making to censor the teaching of history and race in this country?
Sure. Well, you know, there's a very practical point to this. Like, they're trying to eradicate the history of the civil rights movement, among other things. Weirdly enough, the civil rights movement is what made it possible for those universities to be so prominent in the first place. That the quiet part of this narrative is that certainly black people in the South benefited from the civil rights movement. The second biggest beneficiaries of the civil rights movement were the Southern Southern business class at its universities. It's chambers of commerce that were hoping to modernize the South, which was viewed as an economic and intellectual backwater by much of the country. And so in this march backward to make this heavy-handed diktat about what can be taught and what can't be taught, you're literally pushing these institutions back into the past.
I want to comment there. Think of a stereotypical dumb American. If you're going to do an impression of one of the idiots among us, what's the low-hanging fruit go-to joke? What's the voice everybody does? I try not to. I've done it on this stream. Okay, not this one today, but I've done it in the show, which has only existed for about a month. It's the Southern accent, a big, corny, foghorn, leghorn sounding thing. You shouldn't do that, first of all, because even though this is not currently a very sympathetic group when taken as a whole, it's functionally no different than any other, racist caricature that you could do. But they're shooting themselves in the foot with this behavior. The they here being the politicians. If they had any interest in the well-being of their people, that should alarm them. That when people think of ignorant American, that's the voice they do. Thank God that the internet exists, and we can see plenty of examples that are contrary to that perception. But yeah, part of that is the fact that no university wants to be associated with all of this nonsense and have Ron DeSantis shoving people who are anti-education onto their boards. They don't want to deal with that. It has effects well beyond the tenure of the politicians that are allowed to put this in. To the point that, to this day, when people do make fun of dumb Americans, they do that voice. And it's a shame. Because with the methods we have been using up until this point, we've just been perpetuating the same old conflicts over and over and over. I'll just give you a spoiler. What you can do if you live in the South is make sure you vote in primaries for the most left candidate you can think of, or you can find, I should say. And make sure that no matter what, you vote in the general election. I realize it's annoying to be told, go vote. But truly, that in the South is going to be key, because you're going to get less effect out of contacting your representatives by and large. Not no effect. You should still do that, if only to make it a habit. But a lot of those states are purpler than you may think, and it is possible to get some W's.
So good luck with attracting world-class faculty and keeping them there. Good luck with attracting the top students. Good luck with maintaining the rankings that make these universities in the South competitive in the first place. This is a kind of rearguard march with maybe the people who are in those crowds cheering, but none of those people are going to be responsible for what happens when their universities start cratering in terms of their prestige and the regard in which people view them.
I just wonder if this isn't, it seems, at least from the support that DeSantis receives in certain corners, it's part of this obsession with turning back the clock, as you said, not just in the civil rights era, but the sort of the intellectual flourishing of ideas that happened in higher institutes of higher education in the 60s and 70s, and the sort of, bringing a more inclusive, progressive view to the ways in which we understand both, the canon and history and a number of other things. And the right seems to be very preoccupied with that. It's like they lost the culture war writ large, so they're going to wage it in the halls of education. And my concern concern is there are Republicans all over the country that look at what Ron DeSantis is doing and say, hey, I want to do that in my backyard. I want to do that in my state. I want to bring that kind of curricula to Wisconsin or other parts of the country where there is, or Virginia, where you have Glenn Youngkin, the governor, who's expressed support for this kind of stuff. I mean, does that concern you? Apart from what it does to the university system, what about the general public in these states?
Just want to say, fantastic question. What alarms me so much about Ron DeSantis is the fact that he is demonstrating, oh boy, just how Trump was showing to the general public the existing bias towards conservatives that the DOJ has and towards the rich that the DOJ has. Ron DeSantis is showing the general public what you can get away with structurally, the actual legislation you can get away with under this system. And it's insane. He's quite right. There's, Mike DeWine in Ohio. That guy's not going to hesitate to do the same stuff as DeSantis. There's no shortage of people with absolutely no ethics that will follow the DeSantis playbook. It's concerning. The only way this is going to stop with a certainty is, number one, if we begin finally enforcing the laws that we have on the books. And two, if we keep this in the public consciousness around November of next year. It might help you write down some of your feelings about this when you have them, and to keep a book full of specific examples and how you felt about it at the time, so that you can refresh your memory in 2024. Not so it affects how you vote, because presumably if you care enough that you're doing that, you already know how you're going to vote. But so that when your friend that only kind of follows politics and watches Fox News once a week asks you why you're voting the way you're voting, you can give them a great answer. Confidence does a lot in terms of swaying people. Preparation does a lot in terms of building confidence.
Sure. I mean, it has negative implications all over the place. And one of the bizarre ironies of this situation is that when Ron DeSantis, in denouncing the AP course, he used the language of saying that this was discriminatory, that studying these subjects would be discriminatory and implicitly discriminatory against white people. The weird thing about that, the really, really weird thing about that is that people who are scholars of critical race theory will tell you that the theory basically holds that in a society that is as racially riven as this one, people will use anti-discrimination tactics in order to further the cause of actual discrimination. So in short, Ron DeSantis is practicing critical race theory and doing exactly this. He's validating the theory in these actions. But the implications of this are all over the place. And the last thing that I think that's really important to note is that the kind of protections that we have and the academic freedoms that we have in this country are overwhelmingly a product of what happened during the Cold War and the McCarthy era. Another point at which we saw heavy-handed attempts to try to dictate what people could and could not learn, people being prosecuted, people losing their jobs for teaching facts that were accurate but uncomfortable. And so we're yet again having a march backward in the pages of history.
I wonder.
Yeah, we're back in the 60s, early 70s, late 60s, in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of the laws being passed. We're undoing a woman's right to an abortion. We really are making America what Trump thought was great again, except we don't have that wonderful tax structure from those days, where the rich actually had to pay for some of this stuff that you see around you. Roads, fire hydrants. Yeah, it's all the worst parts of America, and none of the good ones. That's the Republican dream. Great comparison there, and I'm sorry that I'm not as familiar with this guy, but Jelani Cobb, great point on his part. I like that he compared it to McCarthyism and the anti-communist panic. That is exactly the temperament of what we're seeing here. I would say the thing to do currently, pay attention to your state representatives. So your senator, your actual the representative from your district, and your governor, for that matter. If you see them getting on board, if you're from a state that has GOP in these positions, if you see them getting on board with anything like this, write them. There's a link in the description for finding your representative. Very easy to use. All of them have a way to contact them. Take advantage of that. Even they will be swayed by messages from you. They want to win their seats. They cannot engage in corruption without your vote. Yet. So make them nervous. We have a couple of comments here. XIX1326 says, I was just following orders. Wasn't a valid excuse during Nuremberg. What made anybody think it was valid today? Donald Trump and the lack of accountability that has been shown to him. Don't forget, by January 6th, he had already had the Mueller report come out, wherein Mueller said it was perfectly conceivable that he could be arrested as soon as he left office. But Department of Justice policy, not a law, policy, prohibited him from taking any real steps. So, once again, all of Trump's fans saw only two things. One, a person saying Trump did something really bad. Two, no consequences being applied. So they were told the rules don't apply to you. They don't apply to this team. I put a link in the description to an old video of mine. Old being a relative term here. The hair was stubble as opposed to the glorious balding eagle you currently see. And it's about morality. And it delves into the different kinds of morality that the political factions in our country tend to skew towards. And it's very useful in terms of understanding what makes them tick, what makes them see something as good or bad. You're ever wondering why we can live in the same country, going through the same things, and come to totally different conclusions about what's going on? Look at that video. It's called Are You a Moral Person? To sum up the GOP standpoint, you are looking at a group of people, particularly the MAGA section, that only view morality in terms of personal consequence. So when they see a politician get accused of something and there's no consequence for them, they simply think that thing they did must not have been wrong. Or they must not have done that thing because there weren't any consequences. It's why I harp so often on putting pressure on the Department of Justice and specifically Merrick Garland to do his mother effing job. Because those are the people that are right now getting converted into extremists more every day. The attacks are ramping up. They're going to keep doing that until some consequences are seen. So why did they think it was valid? Because they didn't see any of the people giving them orders get into trouble for anything before they got those orders. And she's shocked now, this woman, that she got into trouble. She thought she was part of the group that doesn't really get punished. Problem is, she's been tricked. She thought she was in their group. She's not. The reason she's not rich. New information says we must learn to recognize Mother Earth as a common organ shared by all life on her. If we do this, we all win. Well, you know what? Agreed. Wishful thinking is healthy when for a common good we all are family. Agreed with a caveat. Wishful thinking is healthy when combined with actual action. Too often, Democrats specifically, and I'm talking about it's a big tent, all of us, I am just as guilty as everyone else, assume that things will get better because that's sort of the upward trend of history. Technology will always improve, and people will become kinder, and yada yada yada. Wishful thinking, and you're right, it is healthy, but not when we ignore our responsibilities because of it. Not when we assume everything will be fine. So I wholeheartedly agree with you, but Mother Earth right now is suffering because we had a lot of wishful thinking in the 90s, but no action, no legislation. People cared too much about impeaching Bill Clinton. Bear it in mind, but the rest I wholeheartedly agree with. WTF Horror and Sci-Fi says you are 100% correct, sir. Well, I appreciate that. And if WTF Horror and Sci-Fi is a review channel of any sort, I'll be checking that out later because I love horror and sci-fi. All right. So, yeah, all right. Let's jump right into it. This got a little scatterbrained, as is the way with the longer streams. This is all building to a gentleman named Mehdi Hasan. I have wanted to feature him for so long. He is one of my two favorite guys on corporate media. I got just a little teeny tiny taste of corporate media. I was a local news guy. There's a lot more separation from the titans of industry. When you're in a local news station, you are an affiliate, and it doesn't matter. The point being, I can't even fathom the pressures you are under when you are on a national news station. But Mehdi Hasan speaks the truth regularly, consistently. If you do watch like MSNBC and you don't watch Mehdi, do yourself a favor, check him out. And he is talking about a simple question, which we've been asking here for quite a while. That is, at what point does the GOP denial of right-wing terrorism become complicity? Why is it important that this is playing on corporate media? Because it reaches an audience that needs to hear this. Badly needs to hear this. The title of this stream is Americans Are Fed Up with GOP Terrorism. when a segment like this appears on MSNBC, you know things are getting serious. Here it is.
The shootings started almost a month after Election Day. They began on the afternoon of December the 4th in Albuquerque, New Mexico, when a gunman fired 8 rounds at the home of Adrian Barboa, a Democratic county commissioner. 4 days later, on December the 8th, multiple shots were fired at the home of Javier Martinez, a Democratic state representative. His garage was struck and damaged by the gunfire. 3 days after that, on December the 11th, another Democratic commissioner, Debbie O'Malley, found her house peppered with a dozen gunshots. And then earlier this month, another shooting. This time, at least 9 rounds fired into the home of Democratic State Senator Linda Lopez. A month after the 2022 elections, as lies about voter fraud continue to swell in far-right media, after years of threats to election officials and to civil servants, police were on the hunt for an armed gunman targeting Democratic officials. And now they say they have their man. Meet Solomon Pena, 39 years old, a convicted felon who already spent nearly 7 years in prison for burglary, larceny, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and who made a failed run last November for the New Mexico legislature as a pro-Trump Republican candidate. Police now say Pena paid 4 armed gunmen cash and, quote, sent text messages with addresses where he wanted them to shoot at the homes of local Democrats.
This goes even deeper. And if you saw the previous stream we did on this guy, you'll already be aware. But let me just pause it there so you can really get a sense of how serious that is. He is accused of financing terrorism. The definition of terrorism is attempting to achieve political goals through violence and intimidation. Violence or intimidation. Paying people to shoot the homes of Democrats, to do drive-bys. That is financing terrorism. If this story had happened in 2015, that would be the only thing talked about for weeks on cable news. This is one of many stories these days. That is how destructive Donald Trump's presidency was.
Most of whom Pena had confronted at their homes after he lost his election bid in a landslide of 47 points. Because according to police, quote, he had complaints about his election, felt it was rigged. He approached all of these commissioners and the senator at their home with paperwork claiming there was fraud involved in those elections. To be clear, this guy's explanation for losing by 47 percentage points is fraud. Of course it is. When his election conspiracy theories went nowhere, he not only paid those gunmen, allegedly, to hit the homes of Democrats, police say he participated.
On the last shooting, we now have evidence, too, that Pena himself went on this shooting and actually pulled the trigger on at least one of the firearms that was used.
How? How did an apparently disturbed ex-con, whose felony record might have made him ineligible to serve if he was elected, how did this guy even end up as a Republican candidate for state office?
All right, so there's a reason we talked about Santos earlier. George Santos is how. The Republican Party, as in the actual group of people that make up the GOP officials, do not care about quality of candidates because they do not care about quality of legislating. So this guy, who a simple background check would have disqualified in the Democratic Party at least, from running for that seat under their name. It doesn't surprise me at all, that he got past whatever lackluster procedures they had. All you had to do to be, or all you have to do to be a Republican politician right now is have enough social media followers, say insane enough things, and run defense for corporations. As long as you're saying the properly corrupt lines They don't care who you are. They have zero ethics. This is not at all surprising. But I'm delaying the best part. I do want to just say, it was a great, Zix points out, it was a great couple of nights ago when Mehdi preceded Ali Velshi. It may have been the first time two practitioners of Islam anchored two shows in a row on a major news channel. I had not considered that. That is a win. Honestly, that is a win. I'm glad that parts of us of this country are getting to a point where a thing like that can happen and go unnoticed. Isn't that a nice place to be?
Well, when asked about that by a reporter during the campaign, Pena responded in a text, quote, "I stand with Donald J. Trump. I don't want anything to do with you."
For the record, I mean, it's cool that A, it happened, and B, that it wasn't such a big deal. Like, on my end, I wasn't like, it's cool. That's what actual progress looks like, and it's God. I hope those of us who care about making strides keep making strides.
In this case, Pena was being literal. He stood with Donald Trump on January the 6th, 2021, at the Stop the Steal rally in Washington, D.C., the one that led later to the Capitol insurrection. Here was Pena on Twitter, proudly posting a photo of himself on that Washington trip. Just last November, a week after he lost his House race by almost 50 points. 2 days after that, Pena posted one of his last tweets.
You remember when we covered Brazil's January 8th? One of the things that they were doing was rounding up everybody. Everybody. Not letting them go. And then later picking out people here and there. And then later letting people who were there and participating just get away because, well, they weren't actually breaking into the building. They were just part of the group that made up the muscle for those people. That's how you handle it. That dude, for a number of reasons, shouldn't have been allowed to run, but the primary should have been that he was too busy being in jail for his participation in the insurrection.
A photo of him in a Trump-autographed MAGA hoodie. Trump just announced for 2024. I stand with him, Pena wrote. I never conceded my race, now researching my options. 2 weeks later, the shootings started. It is January 2023. We are 2 years after that insurrection, and we have to have another serious talk about the big election lie, the conspiracy theory that Democrats are stealing elections, whether with Italian satellites or Dominion voting machines or bamboo ballots. It is like every other conspiracy theory, whether it's about the moon landing or Tupac's death, laughably stupid. But it's also very different, because the big election lie is a conspiracy theory that leads to real-world violence. We saw that on January the 6th, and we've seen it ever since. A study last year by the University of Chicago's Project on Security and Threats found that 21 million Americans believe both that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president and that force is justified to restore Donald Trump to the presidency.
Hold on a second. So, one thing that I think he just skipped over a bit there. Let me get myself off the screen entirely. So 21 million Americans. First of all, that is a huge amount of our country. Believe that Joe Biden is illegitimate and that violence is justified. So that right there are all potential terrorist candidates. But the thing that was skipped over is the 46 million that either agree that Joe Biden is not legitimately elected, good Lord, or that violence is justified anyway, that they don't care if he was legitimately elected, but violence is indeed justified. That's alarming.
Believe both that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president
That's very alarming.
that force is justified to restore Donald Trump to the presidency. We saw pro-Trump incidents of violence last summer in the lead up to the midterm elections, along with warnings that the former president's angry words could still spur real bloodshed. It was a point that was made on this show many times by many of our expert guests over many months.
Donald Trump incites political violence.
And even telling people, if you beat up protesters, I'll pay your legal fees.
That's a reference to a Donald Trump quote that they continue to reference. You know, when the looting starts, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. That was a widely known meme in this space now. That's what's happening.
It isn't hyperbole to say that he's inciting and radicalizing people.
They're playing into the hand of these types of narratives that fuel this extremism that drives political violence.
When Donald Trump said one of the most truthful things he ever said was that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he wouldn't lose any supporters.
Yes. Guess what? A majority in the House of Representatives, including 10 Republicans, agreed with that when they impeached Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection to prevent.
Again, as was pointed out by Glenn Kirshner earlier, that is every branch of the government except the executive doing their job. Every branch except. Pathetic. That's where we need to focus a great deal of our efforts. Link in the description, Department of Justice contact. Tell them you expect charges to be filed immediately.
His own loss of power.
If you agree with
Donald
that sentiment.
Trump and his MAGA movement, as we have pointed out on this show, as I have said, as my guests have said, they pose a violent threat to the rest of us. And let me be clear, there are not two sides to this story of political violence in America today. No matter how many tales get spun about Antifa super soldiers and Black Lives Matter and woke armies, this is far-right, pro-Trump violence, and not just against Democrats, against democracy itself. Look, there is one horrible and terrible incident that Republicans always cite, from 2017, when a gunman opened fire on a congressional softball game, wounding GOP Congressman Steve Scalise. That shooter, who was killed by police, reportedly volunteered for Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. See, what about Scalise, they say. The thing is, Sanders didn't incite that shooter. He swiftly denounced that shooter. And there haven't been a series of left-wing shooters since.
Yep.
That is the truth. Republicans can cynically use the horrible attack on Scalise to try and both sides political violence in America. But here's what's actually on the other side. Let me just quickly run through a whole host of pro-Trump people who've carried out violence since Trump emerged on the political scene in 2015. And I'm not here even counting the hundreds of convicted insurrectionists from January the 6th. Give me 60 seconds. Start the clock. In 2015, there were the Trump supporters, brothers Scott and Steve Leder, who attacked a homeless man in Boston thinking he was an immigrant and told police Trump was right. In 2016, there were Trump supporters Patrick Eugene Steen, Curtis Allen, and Gavin Wright convicted for plotting a series of bomb attacks against Somali Americans. In 2017, there was Trump supporter Alexander Bissonnette, who murdered 6 Muslim worshippers in a mosque in Quebec City 2 days after Trump announced his ban. Also in 2017, there was Trump supporters James Field Jr., who crashed his car into a group of people protesting a neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. In 2018, there was a Trump supporter Cesar Sayo, the MAGA bomber, who sent mail bombs to more than a dozen people, many of them prominent Democrats who had been demonized by Trump. In 2019, there was a Trump supporter, Patrick Carlinio, who was convicted for threatening to murder Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. In 2020, there was Trump supporter Barry Croft Jr., the last of 4 accomplices convicted of a domestic terror plot that involved trying to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer and spark a violent uprising. In 2021, there was Trump supporter Brandon Hunt, who was found guilty of threatening to kill members of Congress 2 days after the January 6th insurrection. In 2022, there was a Trump supporter, Ricky Walter Schiffer, who was shot dead after he attacked the FBI's Cincinnati field office with a nail gun, apparently because he was mad about the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. And now in 2023, there's the arrest of Trump supporter Solomon Pena. That all happened. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. It feels like you'd have to be a crackpot conspiracy theorist to deny any of that. And yet denial of all this violence from pro-Trump people, incited by Trump and his allies, remains the default setting for so many GOP officials. At what point do we say the obvious? That denial of violent acts by people on your side, coupled with a refusal to even condemn them, is complicity in that violence.
Boom.
Joining me now, our Jared Yates Sexton co.
Now, this is a fascinating interview. I might do just like a part 2 of this in a later bit, or rather in a later stream. But what I really wanted was Mehdi Hasan's take there. Because he's, dead on. Dead on. That is exactly the issue. And we're seeing, yes, the standard Republican playbook of whataboutism and blah, 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 blah. But complicity has to be discussed. You can't allow these people to get away with supporting terrorists by running cover for them, by pretending and using rhetoric to suggest that it's not a major issue. Especially those people that are like, well, what do you expect when you have stolen elections? That mother effer, the people that say that, should be arrested for saying that. We jump on First Amendment all the time. But just like with the Stop Woke Act, using the very language of anti-racists in order to promote racist ideology. These people in the GOP are also using language designed to support freedom of speech, for example, in order to get away with crimes that stifle people's freedom of speech. The fella shooting bullets into the doors of Democratic politicians because he doesn't like what they say. That's what he's trying to accomplish with that act of terrorism. And us playing at being ultra fair has not been fair. It has resulted in an obvious gap in our defenses, quite literally, and the GOP takes advantage of it. I will do one piece of criticism for Mehdi Hasan there. He asks the question, at what point does this become complicity? And the rhetorical answer, the answer you're supposed to fill in your head is right now. Just say it. Just say it. He's using a Fox News tactic there. I think given the circumstances, it's understandable. I certainly don't know that I could do any better. No, I take that back. I do know. I couldn't do better. But nits need to be picked nonetheless, and that is my nitpick. Say this is complicity. Because it is. Jeff Martinez. Yes, sir. It is indeed complicity. So I came across one more person today in the preparation for the show, and I don't know how I missed this channel. It's a really well done production, and it's called Signified B-Sides. Follows this standard format, just a guy talking into a camera, but his depth that he goes into, and quickly, is admirable. And I'd like to show them to you. We have essentially two major goals on this channel. One is to tell you what you can do about these various issues. We usually, in fact, just about every stream, we include links in the description that will allow you to take action. They exist in this stream. They will exist in the VOD. But we also want to share useful content that you may not have seen. In this case, I'd like to show you Signified B-Sides. He's discussing where all this comes from. And he's talking about misogyny, but I think the same train of thought that he's discussing here could be applied to a lot of the ugliness that is just habit for a lot of Americans. Here he is.
So let me get to grooming though, because another argument that has validity that I want to give breath to is this morally pure take that I kept seeing, morally lucky, and get the fuck over it. Get the fuck over it. Like, let it go, because none of us are morally lucky or morally pure. Some of us get to that point earlier. Some of us have more venues to jump off of the shit earlier. But at the end of the day, we are all raised in a white supremacist, capitalist, homophobic, imperialist patriarchy. All of us. All of us. None of us are without that residue. We all grew up watching the same shit. We all participated or passively watched the same toxic behavior. We played with dolls if you were girls and trucks if you were boys. Like,
real quick, who else remembers seeing old Bond films where Bond literally twists a girl's arm until she agrees to kiss him? I love Bond movies. Love them. But I cringe thinking about that scene. It's true. He's got a point. We've grown up, all of us who exist today, have grown up in a society that really skews towards an ugly way of thinking that we are better than. Plain and simple. All of us are better than the situation we have accepted.
all the things they do to us as children as a part of the hegemony of this nation, can't speak outside of here, but it is global. All of us did that. And it lends itself to certain behaviors and attitudes, perspectives. And I'm coming back. God damn it. But let's talk about
it's not just me that has that habit.
So I've talked about Eduardo Bonilla Silva's concept of white habitus a bunch. And to explain it, essentially there is a set of environmental factors that are in place in most white spaces and communities that seek to reproduce a passive engagement and adherence to white supremacy. Most white people in this country do not have close relationships with non-white people. The country is segregated in that way. And so what that means is you are learning and understanding about BIPOC experiences and realities through a white filter that is going to very much lend itself to negative interpretations of those things.
Now, bear in mind, he's not saying no white person had a black friend growing up. He's saying the society, from his reading, the society that we are growing up in is largely segregated and is largely of this makeup. And the result is, even if you are from a small town where it's you and your best friend who's a black kid, both of you are then getting your information about the world from a segregated society, one that is not segregated by law, but is segregated by culture and segregated by economics. It always, God help me, comes back to economics. I'm going to let him finish this point. It's a long video. We're not doing the whole thing. I just want to hear this first point because, I've already got 2 books on my next up to read from this video.
And so what that gives us is that gives us colorblind racism, right? That makes it so when your uncle or your friend's dad starts doing racist shit, you don't see anything wrong with it. That's a normal thing that happens in your community, which means that when things are escalated and elevated to like more overtly racist shit, your resistance to that, even though you've been hearing your whole life, this whole thing that it's not a choice, it's bullshit. Everybody who has participated in any type of conservative, racist, whatever activity knows you're not supposed to be racist. You do it anyway. Now, I get why you do it because you're conditioned to do it, but this idea that you were just tricked into fucking posting swastikas on Twitter, you know, when you were 15 by some nefarious mind control from amazing atheists is bullshit. I don't know if it's nature at all. I mean, but it depends on how you can understand nature. I don't think anybody's naturally racist or whatever.
Again, I'm with him here.
I think your environment can nurture you into that, and then it becomes a reflexive and natural reflex of how you behave.
So, yeah, the point he was making there about the people who are engaging in a lot of this racist behavior, particularly the young kids, knowing that it's wrong when they do it, is so true. So true. Because some of the most racist things I've ever heard start with, I'm not racist, but. That qualifier, like, I know it's wrong to be racist. Let me say this racist thing. It is very much a product of our society. That means we have to change our society. I would like to pull up a viewer comment, which couldn't be better for this. Zix, once again, thank you for chiming in. Man, I appreciate it. I'm an old white dude, and I don't expect to live long enough to see justice done. So help me. I'm going to work hard to make that not true. I still think it's going to take a while. I'm just working on an immortality pill. That's a gag. What I hate most is being lumped in with the Fox News crowd just because I was born in the early 50s. Let me tell you, my friend, the fact that you are here now, watching a stream titled America Fed Up with GOP Terrorism, spending your Thursday morning trying to educate yourself and trying to find out what you can do. I do not lump you in with the Fox News crowd. As a matter of fact, I happen to think you're one of the good guys. I also happen to think that if America pulls out of this nosedive, we're going to have you and people like you to thank. It does suck when a group of people that are on a surface level similar to you, either by age or skin color, get you treated in a way that you feel you don't deserve. And every time that happens, I would recommend using it as motivation to take action. The action can be as simple as making a phone call or writing an email or signing up for a progressive newsletter. But it's good motivation because it is a constant pressure. And constant pressure is how change is accomplished in America. Valerie, chime in as well. You are not alone, Zix. Hell yeah, Valerie. Also, Valerie, just getting started. Love Glenn. Listen to him every night. Glad I found you. Like your commentary a great deal. Well, thank you so much. Well, this is what you can do. So let's get to, on all of this, what you can do. If you'll recall, we started the stream talking about variance in the U.S. The U.S. is designed to resist variance, a sudden spike in activity. Change is accomplished with constant pressure, and you can only apply constant pressure if the pressure you are applying is sustainable for you. If you do not already make it a habit to write your representative, or write the Department of Justice, or call them, make it a habit. You don't have to do it every day. I usually recommend in these streams once a week or once a month, whatever you're comfortable with, but do it often enough to make it a habit. Outweigh some of that right-wing pressure that they are getting, your representatives. If you already do that, genuinely, this will help in the comments of this video or any of my other videos. Write down the fact that you did it. Let us know. Let other people see that it's a normal thing to do, because it is a normal thing to do. And we have to normalize it for progressives. I would argue that progressives think they are polite, when in fact they are passive. That is what must change. Well, thank you for joining me today. It's been your old pal Jake, and I greatly enjoy doing this stream. If you enjoyed listening to it, I would love a like, and maybe even consider giving me a subscribe so I can see you again next time. This has been WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do.